What would you do if a woman with power accused you of something you didn't do, knowing the world would believe her, not you? It was late. The company's annual holiday party had wound down, leaving behind empty wine glasses, half-eaten hors d'oeuvres, and a trail of employees stumbling into Ubers with loosened ties and glittering dresses. Julian Carter wasn't one of them. A senior analyst who always kept a low profile, Julian stayed behind to help clean up the mess others left behind. He didn't drink. He didn't socialize much. He had one reason for being at that party: to show he was still a team player, and then to get home to his daughter, Naomi. But that night, something unexpected happened. Just as he was heading for the exit, he found Vanessa Blake, his boss-own of the most powerful executives at Whitmore Co., slumped over in a chair outside the restroom, shoes off, makeup smudged, whispering to herself through tears. He paused. Most people would have walked right past her. But Julian wasn't most people. "Miss Blake?" he said softly. She looked up, confused and clearly intoxicated. Her usual icy composure was gone. In its place, a woman on the verge of collapsing. He offered her water. She refused. Offered to call someone. She said she had no one, so he did the only thing he could think of. He helped her to her feet, gathered her purse, and said quietly, "Let me get you home safe." Vanessa mumbled the address of her upscale condo in Midtown, and Julian drove her there in silence, the company car humming softly beneath the city lights. She slurred a few things along the way, complaints about life, about pressure, about men who disappointed her. But Julian said nothing. He just listened. When they arrived, he helped her to her front door. She tripped once, giggled, then burst into tears again. Julian didn't step inside. He helped her unlock the door, walked her in just enough to make sure she didn't fall over any furniture, then set her keys on the table and left. He never touched her. Never crossed a line, never even thought about it, just did what any decent man would do. But the next morning, everything changed. Monday, 8:47 a.m. The office was quiet when Julian arrived. He liked it that way, before the chatter, the meetings, the noise. But as he stepped into his corner cubicle, his company phone buzzed. A calendar invite, meeting with Vanessa Blake. Urgent. Closed door, no other attendees. He sighed, tucked in his shirt, and headed up. When he opened the door to her office, she was already seated behind her sleek glass desk, heels off, coffee steaming beside her, and a look on her face he didn't recognize. Cold. Sharp. Calculated. "Julian," she said, not looking up. He closed the door slowly. "Take a seat." He did. Then she picked up her phone and turned the screen toward him. There, in full color, was a photo. Vanessa, in her bed, hair tousled, makeup smeared. Looking like a woman who had been compromised. Julian blinked. "I don't understand," he said carefully. Vanessa leaned forward. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Her voice was icy, rehearsed. "A man like you, in my house, when I was vulnerable." Julian froze. "I walked you to your door. You were drunk. I made sure you didn't fall down." "Then I left," she laughed, a dry, dismissive laugh. "How convenient," she said. The helpful employee, saving his drunk boss. And then, well, we both know what men like you do when you think no one's watching. There it was, the insinuation, the poison. Julian felt his jaw tighten. He had heard those kinds of phrases before. Men like you, people like you. He thought of all the times she had made subtle comments about his background, about how he had come so far, about how lucky he was to be here. He had let them slide. He had kept his head down. But this was different. "I'm sure this is a misunderstanding," he said evenly. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. "No misunderstanding? You embarrassed me?" "Invaded my privacy. And now, you'll pay for it." She stood slowly, walked around the desk, and leaned close. I'm considering reporting this as sexual harassment. It's your word against mine, Julian. And let's be honest, she smiled. Who do you think they'll believe? For a moment, Julian didn't say a word. He looked into the face of the woman who controlled his future. Who had the power to end his career? And who believed, truly believed that her word would always outweigh his? But what she didn't know, Julian Carter had recorded everything. From the moment he found her crying near the bathroom, to the car ride home, to the time he left her standing safely inside the doorway, every word, every second documented. Because men like Julian, who grew up in foster care, who had no family to catch them when they fell, learned early to protect themselves, especially when they looked like him, especially in places like this. He didn't respond to her threat. He just sat there, calmly, and smiled. Not a smug smile, not a smirk, but the kind of smile that says, "You think you've won. You have no idea what I've prepared for." Julian Carter left Vanessa Blake's office in silence. Not a word, not a reaction. Just the steady steps of a man who had learned long ago that anger didn't serve you when the odds were stacked against you, especially not when you looked like him, especially not in a place like this. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. As he walked past the executive suite, a few heads turned, then quickly turned away again. Whispers, avoided eye contact, that subtle tension. He had felt it before in the army, in college, in every boardroom he'd ever sat in. It was the feeling of being other, and it was back. Julian sat at his desk and opened his drawer slowly. Inside, a plain black flash drive. Nothing fancy. No label, but on it, everything. Voice recordings, security footage, timestamps, backup files of company communication logs. Every polite insult, every harmless microaggression. Every time someone questioned his qualifications after delivering a flawless report. Every time his work was double-checked while others got a pass. But none of it mattered now unless he played it right. Because Vanessa Blake wasn't just any boss. She was the boss head of strategy, golden girl of the board, the face investors loved. And Julian, he was just the black guy in the room who never complained, who dressed sharp, who stayed late, who smiled through everything. And now, he was the perfect scapegoat, a single dad, no connections in the upper ranks. No one to vouch for him when the story hit HR. He could already see how it would go. It's unfortunate, there's no proof. We're putting him on leave until we sort it out. But Vanessa made one mistake. She thought he had nothing. That afternoon, Julian picked up Naomi from school. She ran to him, her braids bouncing, her backpack nearly bigger than her. "Daddy," she shouted, "can we get tacos?" Julian smiled. He hadn't told her anything. Not about Vanessa, not about the threat, not about the storm coming. He didn't want her to worry, so he said yes. Tacos it was. Because no matter what happened next, he would protect her. No one was taking that from him. Later that night, as Naomi did her homework at the kitchen table, Julian reviewed the files again. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about the pattern. Black and Latino employees being skipped for promotions, performance reviews that suddenly dipped after praise from team leaders, emails filled with cultural concerns that were just veiled racism. And then there were the whispers. About Jasmine Lee. She had been Vanessa's assistant. Smart. Sharp. Hardworking. But one day, she was gone. No goodbye email, no explanation, just gone. And word around the office was that she had tried to play the race card. At the time, Julian didn't ask questions. He had his own battles. But now he wished he had. Because it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about exposing the truth. The next morning, things changed. Julian walked into the office and immediately knew something was wrong. People stared. Some whispered. Others just avoided him,
altogether. At 9:05, Sharon Blake from HR appeared at his desk. "Julian, we need to talk." No smile. No warmth, just corporate ice. In the HR room, Vanessa was already waiting. Flanked by two company lawyers, dressed in cream, sipping from a branded coffee mug like it was just another meeting. Julian sat. Sharon cleared her throat. "There has been a formal complaint filed against you." Julian nodded. He'd expected it. Vanessa slid her phone across the table.
"Here's the photo." Julian glanced at it. Her in bed, eyes closed. Makeup smudged, looking vulnerable, and then she said it again. "You put me in this position, Julian. A man alone with a defenseless woman." He stared at the photo. Clinically.
Quietly. Then he asked, "Who took this?" "I did," Vanessa said quickly, "when I woke up and realized what had happened." Julian blinked.
Lie number one, and she didn't even hesitate, but he said nothing. "Not yet," Sharon continued uneasily. "We'll need to place you on administrative leave while we investigate." Vanessa leaned forward. "Julian, you've been a good employee. You always have, but sometimes men in your position—" She paused. "They get confused about boundaries." Julian's stomach turned. "Men in your position." There it was again. Not people, not employees. Men like you. He had heard it his whole life. From foster care caseworkers who doubted his future. From commanding officers who questioned his discipline. From professors who were surprised by his GPA. He had learned to smile through it. But this was an execution dressed in professionalism. That night, Naomi asked him, "Daddy, are you okay?" He knelt beside her and nodded. "You always say good people win in the end," she whispered. He kissed her forehead. "They do, baby, because good people never give up." Vanessa Blake thought she had the upper hand. She thought Julian Carter would quietly resign. She didn't know. He had proof. He had patience. And he had a plan. Julian Carter didn't sleep that night. Not really. He lay in bed, eyes open, listening to the sound of Naomi breathing in the next room. 8 years old, so full of questions. So full of faith. And he couldn't stop hearing her voice from earlier. Good people win in the end. He wanted to believe that. But in this world, sometimes good people were silenced. Sometimes they were fired, erased, forgotten. Especially people who looked like him. He got up quietly, walked to his desk, and plugged in an old flash drive. The screen came to life with folders labeled, dated, indexed. 2.5 years of documentation, every comment, every email, every skipped promotion that didn't make sense, every joke that wasn't really a joke. Every time someone praised his work in private but dismissed him in public. This didn't start with Vanessa Blake. She was just the one arrogant enough to say it out loud. But the culture, it had always been there. Julian had seen it from the moment he joined the company, the way executives praised diversity in newsletters but winced when someone different spoke up in meetings. The way Vanessa always double-checked his work but approved mediocre reports from others without a glance. The way Sharon from HR said, "We're a family," but never invited him to the off-site retreats. He noticed it all. And he kept receipts. What Vanessa didn't know, Julian Carter wasn't just a data analyst. He wasn't just lucky to be here. Before this job, he had served 4 years in the military. Before that, he survived 5 different foster homes. A childhood defined by abandonment, instability, and paperwork. So he learned young, protect yourself, document everything. Trust slowly, smile only when necessary. And when he left the army, he didn't just drift into civilian life. He used his GI Bill to earn a master's in information systems. He knew databases, he knew networks. He knew exactly how to move inside a company without being seen. And over time, he had quietly built a digital fortress.
He opened a folder titled Bias Incidents Internal. Inside, screen recordings, HR reports, meeting transcriptions. All clean, all time-stamped, all irrefutable. He clicked another folder. Voicemail, Jasmine Lee. A name that had haunted him lately. Jasmine had been Vanessa's assistant, bright, quick, professional, until she was suddenly fired. Vanessa had told the board Jasmine became emotional and inappropriate. But in the voicemail, Jasmine had said something else. Julian, I know we didn't talk much, but if anything ever happens to you, just know I have a backup. And I'm not the only one. He stared at the waveform on the screen. A backup. What had she meant? He didn't know, but he had a feeling the truth was a lot deeper than one fake accusation. At 7:42 a.m., before Naomi woke up, Julian made his first move. He called Grace Howard, a civil rights attorney with a reputation for being relentless. He didn't choose her by accident. She had taken down 2 Fortune 500 execs in the past 5 years, both for discriminatory practices that started small and ended in federal investigations. Julian Carter, he said when she picked up. There was a pause, then her voice. Sarah Jasmine Lee mentioned you. She said you might be careful. Julian nodded slowly. I'm ready to stop being careful. By 9:00 a.m. they were in her office. He brought his laptop. She brought her legal pad. He walked her through everything. The evaluations, the review scores, the pay disparities, the exclusion from decision-making, the private WhatsApp messages between managers screenshotted and saved. And finally, the recordings, including the one from Vanessa's office, where she said, It's your word against mine, Julian, and let's be honest, who do you think they'll believe? Grace didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She leaned back and said, They're going to regret underestimating you. Julian nodded. I'm not doing this just for me. I know, she said. You're doing this for your daughter. That evening, as Naomi sat coloring at the kitchen table, Julian opened his notes again. She looked up. Are you still working, Daddy? He smiled softly. I'm building something. What is it? He thought for a moment. A shield. Like a superhero? Julian chuckled. Something like that. She nodded and went back to coloring. He stared at her for a long time, because Naomi didn't know what kind of world she was growing up in yet. She didn't know that even when you're polite, professional, and patient, someone will still try to tear you down just to prove you don't belong, but she would learn. And when she did, she would know her father stood up, not with fists, not with revenge, but with truth, with proof, with a plan. Vanessa Blake had picked the wrong man to scapegoat. Julian Carter wasn't angry. He was ready. While Vanessa Blake spent her morning in meetings, smiling, sipping cappuccinos, pretending nothing was wrong, Julian Carter was doing something very different. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't hiding. He was executing. By now, the office buzzed with whispers. The rumor? Julian had been placed on administrative leave for inappropriate behavior. Vanessa never made a formal accusation. She didn't need to. She just planted the seeds, let the silence speak for itself, let her concern sound like caution. Let his absence suggest guilt. Her plan was working, or so she thought. By noon, Vanessa was on a private call with Danielle Brooks, a regional director and longtime friend. I handled it quickly, Vanessa said, casually filing her nails. I told HR to act before he made it messy. On the other end, Danielle chuckled. At least you took care of it before he tried to play the race card. You know how long those cases drag out. Vanessa laughed. Exactly. I didn't give him the chance. She swirled her coffee. One single black man? Against someone like me? Please. What she didn't know. Julian had been listening. Before his suspension,
Julian had quietly installed a network monitoring tool on his team's internal systems. Not to spy, but to protect himself from people who would weaponize their power if they ever felt threatened. He never expected to use it, until now. The system captured everything: private calls, internal messages, flagged keywords, and Vanessa? She was digging her own grave one smug sentence at a time. Julian didn't feel victorious, not yet, because this wasn't about proving her wrong. This was about showing Naomi, his daughter, that truth matters, that you don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes, you just press record. That night, Grace Howard, his lawyer, called with an update. "You were right," she said. "The discrimination runs deep. I've cross-checked employee records. Latino and black employees have lower performance scores despite equal or better output. There's a pattern." Julian was quiet for a beat. Then he asked, "Would that be enough for a legal case?" Grace paused. "It's enough for something bigger than that." She explained that the Department of Justice had quietly begun investigating major corporations with patterns of racial bias. Julian's company on that list, and his files, might be the missing piece they needed. Julian closed his laptop slowly. He looked across the room at Naomi, curled up on the couch, reading. She looked up. "Is work okay, Daddy?" He smiled gently. "It will be. Are people being mean again?" He hesitated, then nodded. "A little." Naomi thought for a moment. "Can you be mean back?" Julian knelt down beside her. "No," he said, "but I can be smart back." The next day, while Vanessa sent a confidential memo to other executives, "Be cautious of employees who display questionable behavior," Julian was meeting with a journalist. Her name was Rachel Klein, and she didn't write fluff. She wrote truth, the kind that ruined careers, the kind that brought down CEOs. She had been tipped off by Jasmine Lee months ago. But Julian was the gold mine she'd been waiting for. He laid out the files, showed her timelines, charts, email chains, meeting logs, and audio. Her eyes widened. "You have her recorded saying this?" He nodded. Rachel looked stunned. "This isn't just racism," she said. "This is a coordinated cover-up." Julian looked her dead in the eye. "It's a system that protects power, not people. And what do you want to do?" He didn't hesitate. "Burn it down with the truth." Meanwhile, Vanessa called HR again. "Make sure his keycard doesn't work anymore," she said. "Have security watch the lobby." Sharon Blake, head of HR, hesitated. "This might be premature." Vanessa cut her off. "Do it." She had no idea the very system she thought she controlled was recording her every move. By Friday afternoon, Julian had finished uploading his encrypted files to 3 secure drives, one for Grace, one for Rachel, one for the Department of Justice. He made backups, stored them offline, protected them like he would protect Naomi. Because this wasn't about one case anymore. This was about every qualified person passed over, every whispered comment in elevators, every "you" people slipped into conversation. This was about dignity. Back at the office, Vanessa raised a glass of wine over lunch with Danielle. "To cleaning house," she said. Danielle clinked her glass. "To staying ahead," they laughed. Arrogant, untouchable. So sure of their version of the story. But miles away, Julian Carter was already writing the ending, and they had no idea it wouldn't end in silence. It would end in federal charges, because the one thing they never imagined was that the quiet, polite, predictable man they tried to destroy was the one man who had prepared for this day all along. Vanessa Blake was in rare form. She moved through the office like a queen heels sharp, dress flawless, coffee in hand, smiling like a woman who had just conquered her greatest threat. In her mind, Julian Carter was done. Suspended, discredited, whispered about. His name already a stain in the HR system. She had planted the seed, and now she just had to watch it grow. In her world, the truth didn't matter. Perception did, and she had crafted hers perfectly, successful, respected, untouchable. While Julian, he was now the problem employee, the one who crossed a line. No need for facts when people already believed the story. That's how the system worked. But what Vanessa didn't know was that every step she took was being documented. Julian Carter wasn't watching from the sidelines. He was watching from the inside. The network system he once helped build, still active, still feeding him data. He saw the emails, the phone logs, even the private Slack messages between managers mocking him. At home, Julian sat in his kitchen, laptop open, Naomi humming softly in the background as she colored. One screen showed a live transcription of Vanessa's recent call. She was laughing again, this time with Danielle Brooks, her friend and regional director. Honestly, the company's better without people like him, Vanessa said, casually. You know the type, always quiet, always watching, always waiting to say they're the victim. Danielle snorted. And now he's wanting leave. What's he gonna do, sue you? Vanessa laughed harder. Let him try. Julian hit save. Another file logged. Another nail in the coffin. The next morning, Grace Howard called with urgency in her voice. Julian, she said, the DOJ just confirmed your company's on the preliminary investigation list. Julian's heart skipped. Grace continued. They're collecting evidence on patterns of racial discrimination inside major firms. Your recordings, your data, it could be the key to opening a full federal case. Julian leaned back in his chair. He had dreamed of this moment, but never for revenge. He wasn't interested in headlines or payouts. He wanted accountability. He wanted Naomi to grow up in a world where someone like him couldn't be erased with a rumor. Meanwhile, across town, Vanessa was taking a victory lap. She was on a video call with other female executives. Powerful, confident women who had learned to survive in male-dominated spaces by being twice as ruthless. They sipped from wine glasses in their home offices, sharing stories of handling difficult employees. Vanessa spoke proudly. It's always the same. These men think being polite gives them immunity. But the moment they forget their place, that's when you strike. The other women laughed. She smiled. Julian Carter was just another man who forgot that proximity is not power. She didn't know that every second of that call was being transcribed, every word tagged, dated, saved. Julian didn't even have to listen in real time anymore. His system handled that. And then, a moment of carelessness. Vanessa poured herself another glass of wine and said something that changed everything. Honestly, if HR knew how much I've adjusted those performance reviews over the years, we'd all be in trouble. Danielle raised an eyebrow on the screen. You what? Vanessa smirked. You have to work the system. If someone doesn't fit the culture, a few tweaks to their file keeps them from climbing too high. Silence. Then uncomfortable laughter. The transcript auto-uploaded. Grace received it within minutes. She called Julian immediately. This is it. The next morning, Rachel Kleinthey, investigative journalist, called as well. I've drafted the exposé, she said. It's not just about you anymore, Julian. It's about every employee they silenced. Every lie they built into policy. Julian exhaled. He had no idea how far this would go. But now, it was bigger than him. At that exact moment, Vanessa was walking into a lunch meeting with a major investor. She was glowing. Power suit, designer bag, perfect posture. She had no idea what was coming. Back at Julian's apartment, Naomi looked up from her cereal. Daddy? Yeah, baby? She tilted her head. Why are you always working on the computer now? Julian smiled. Because sometimes, when someone tells the wrong story about you, you have to write the truth yourself. Naomi nodded. Will people believe your story?
He looked her in the eyes.
They will, because I have something they don't. She blinked. What? Julian smiled.
Proof. Vanessa Blake thought she had won. She thought she had buried the only man brave enough to stand up. But the thing about men like Julian Carter, they didn't shout, they didn't threaten, they just waited. And when the time was right, they pulled back the curtain and showed the world what power really looked like when it was stripped of its lies. Monday morning began like every other Monday for Vanessa Blake. She arrived at the office in a black luxury SUV, tailored navy suit, expensive sunglasses, fresh blowout, perfect smile. She ordered her usual, oat milk latte, double shot, no foam. At 9 o'clock sharp, she entered the executive suite, heels clicking like a metronome of power. Vanessa Blake was winning. Julian Carter was nowhere to be seen. HR had gone quiet. Her cleanup was complete. She opened her laptop, confident, and started preparing for her 10 a.m. investor call. Then came the knock. A pause, then another knock firmer. She frowned. Come in. But it wasn't her assistant. It wasn't an investor. It was Sharon Blake from HR. And her face was pale. Behind her stood two men in dark suits with federal badges. Vanessa, Sharon began carefully, we need to speak with you. Privately? Vanessa blinked. What is this about? One of the agents stepped forward. I'm Special Agent Whitaker, Department of Justice. This is Agent Morales. We're here in connection with an ongoing federal investigation into discriminatory practices within your company. Vanessa froze. Charles Whitmore, the company's CEO, arrived moments later, his face drawn and tense. What the hell is going on here? He demanded. Agent Whitaker opened a tablet and hit play. Vanessa's voice filled the room. A single black man against someone like me? Please, the courts might pretend to care, but credibility still matters. The room went silent. Charles turned slowly to face her. Vanessa, tell me you didn't say that. She stammered. That's taken out of context. Another clip played. If HR knew how much I've adjusted those performance reviews over the years, we'd all be in trouble. Vanessa's heart dropped. She grabbed the edge of her desk to steady herself. This is insane, she muttered. These are private conversations, Agent Morales replied calmly. Legally obtained, under a federal warrant. Based on a formal complaint, supported by extensive evidence, he placed a folder on her desk. Photos, emails, audio files, all documenting a coordinated effort to suppress and retaliate against minority employees. Charles picked up one document. His hands shook. This is your voice, Vanessa. This is your system login-altering employee files. This is your phone call with Danielle Brooks. He turned toward the agents. We'll cooperate fully. Then, without emotion, she's fired, effective immediately. Vanessa's world shattered. The office, the boardroom, the respect. It all vanished in one sentence. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. I can explain. But no one was listening anymore, because now the truth had a microphone. And it wasn't hers. Elsewhere, Julian Carter stood by the window of his apartment. He was dressed in a quiet suit. Not because he had somewhere to be, but because today was the day he reclaimed his dignity. His phone buzzed. A message from Grace Howard. It's done. FBI executed the warrant. You'll hear from DOJ this afternoon. Naomi tugged at his sleeve. Daddy, why are you smiling? Julian looked down, then lifted her into his arms. Because sometimes the people who try to bury you forget you're a seed. That afternoon, Julian sat across from DOJ investigators on a secure video call. His files already submitted, his voice clear and steady, the evidence undeniable. Charts showing racial disparities in performance reviews, recordings of biased conversations, audit logs proving manipulation of internal systems. HR policies twisted into tools of exclusion. Agent Whitaker leaned forward. Mr. Carter,
Your case might be the key to a much broader prosecution. You didn't just expose a bad manager, you exposed a culture. Julian nodded once. Quiet, focused. I didn't do this to take anyone down. I did it to make sure my daughter never has to live this story. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat alone in a corporate conference room. No phone, no laptop. Just the sound of her own breath. Her badge was gone. Her title erased. Her legacy reduced to a folder of transcripts and surveillance records. By the end of the day, her name trended on Twitter. Not as a leader, not as a mentor, but as a cautionary tale. The executive who thought no one was watching. At bedtime, Naomi curled up beside Julian, her stuffed giraffe in her arms. Did everything go okay at work? She asked. Julian smiled. Yes, baby, everything went just fine. She tilted her head. You told the truth, right? He nodded. And people listened. He pulled the blanket up to her chin. Eventually, they always do. Because the thing about truth is, it doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. Quiet. Patient. Recording. And when the time comes, it knocks. The conference room was silent, except for the low hum of the air conditioner and the soft shuffle of paper as Special Agent Whitaker placed a folder on the table. Vanessa Blake didn't speak. She couldn't. Not when the photos were laid out in front of her. Not when the timeline was printed in bold black ink. Not when the truth was finally visible. The agents didn't yell. They didn't accuse. They didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any words could. Agent Whitaker flipped to the first page. This is the photo you submitted as proof, he said. Vanessa looked down. It was her, in bed, makeup smeared, a blanket pulled up to her chest. You claimed this photo was taken the morning after the party, correct? She nodded, slowly. 3 hours after Julian Carter left your home, the agent added. She froze. He continued. According to security footage from your building, Julian was recorded exiting the premises at exactly 11:43 p.m. He slid a still image across the table, clear timestamp. Julian, exiting the lobby, alone, coat buttoned, keys in hand. And yet, your photo shows your bedside lamp turned off, he said. Lighting conditions confirm it was taken much later, long after you were alone. Vanessa's voice came out barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to. But it didn't matter anymore. Charles Whitmore, the CEO, stood up slowly. His jaw clenched. Vanessa, you didn't just manipulate a photo. You tried to destroy a man's life, one of our best employees. And you used race, position, and perception as weapons. She tried to respond, but Agent Morales cut in. There's more. He opened another folder. This is a log of HR entries made under your account. Over the last 3 years, you manually adjusted performance reviews, lowering the scores of Black and Latino employees while boosting those of white counterparts with weaker results. Vanessa looked like she'd been punched in the stomach. This is ridiculous, she said, voice cracking. But then came the email prints. The Slack screenshots. The memo she wrote last year that said, too much diversity, too quickly can dilute our culture. Charles's face was red with fury. You've compromised our contracts. Our public image. Our credibility. He turned to the agents. She's no longer with the company. We'll provide full cooperation. Vanessa opened her mouth to plead, but the words never came, because deep down, she knew it was over. Across the city, Julian Carter sat in a quiet corner of Grace Howard's law office. He didn't pace. He didn't speak. He just waited. Grace entered with a slight smile. You ready for the next phase? She asked. He nodded. She sat across from him. They confirmed it. Vanessa's out. The DOJ is moving forward, and the company has issued a formal statement acknowledging systemic failures. Julian closed his eyes for a brief moment, not out of relief, but from the sheer weight of what it took to get here. You've done something rare, Grace said.
You didn't just survive. You exposed the rot. Julian shook his head. I didn't want to destroy anyone. Grace leaned in. No, Julian. You wanted accountability, and you got it. That night, back at home, Naomi waited for him at the kitchen table. She had drawn a picture. Stick figures. One looked like him in a suit, another was her holding his hand. And behind them, a big building with the words, "Truth wins." He picked it up, smiling. What's this, baby girl? She beamed. It's you, being the hero. Julian pulled her close. I'm not a hero, he whispered. She looked up at him, eyes wide. Yes, you are. Because you didn't lie, even when they did. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat in the back of a black car. No assistant, no emails, no badge. Just the weight of her own choices and a future suddenly filled with lawyers and subpoenas. Because when you try to bury the truth, and the truth knows how to build a case, it buries you instead. At 10:42 p.m., Julian received one last text that night from Sharon Blake, the HR director, who once looked the other way. I'm sorry I didn't speak up earlier. You were always the most prepared man in the room. I should have known better. Julian stared at the screen, then deleted the message. No bitterness, no gloating, just closure. Because this was never about revenge. It was about protecting his name, his child, his dignity, and proving that even in a world built to silence him, he could still be heard. The sun hadn't even risen when Julian Carter opened his laptop. His daughter Naomi was still asleep, curled beneath a pink comforter, clutching her stuffed giraffe. But Julian was wide awake, because something had shifted. This wasn't just about Vanessa Blake anymore. It wasn't even about him. It was about the system, the one that had protected people like Vanessa, while quietly silencing people like Julian. And now, that system was cracking. The night before, Julian had received the formal request from the Department of Justice. They wanted his cooperation in an ongoing federal investigation into corporate racial discrimination. Not just at his company, but across the industry. Julian's data 2.5 years of meticulous records was the missing piece. A blueprint of quiet suppression, a map of how power operated behind closed doors. At 8:12 a.m., he met with Agent Whitaker over secure video call. Mr. Carter, the agent said, we've reviewed your files, performance review patterns, pay disparities, manipulated internal systems. It's the most comprehensive civilian documentation we've ever seen. Julian nodded once. I wasn't trying to build a case. I was just trying to protect myself. Agent Whitaker leaned in. Well, now you're helping us protect a lot more people. Across town, Vanessa Blake sat alone in her high-rise apartment. The media had found her. The headline on the morning news, Whistleblower exposes executive who manipulated reviews based on race. Her phone buzzed non-stop, not with support, but with cold corporate distance, board members, investors, her country club friends, all of them saying the same thing. We're shocked. We had no idea. We can't be associated. She tried to call Danielle Brooks, straight to voicemail. She tried to call Charles Whitmore. Blocked. For the first time in her life, Vanessa Blake had no power. Not because someone stole it, but because she used it to try and destroy someone who never stopped documenting. Back in Grace Howard's law office, Julian met with a small team of civil rights attorneys, data analysts, and advocates. It wasn't just about his lawsuit anymore. It was about creating a public report, a document the DOJ could use to reform policies, pressure CEOs, and bring real accountability. Grace looked at him across the table. Do you know what this could become? Julian didn't answer, but Naomi's drawing was folded in his jacket pocket. Truth wins, in a child's handwriting. That was all the answer he needed. Later that week, a call came from Rachel Klein, the investigative journalist.
We're going national, she said. The expose will run in the New York Times. Primetime interview. They want to meet you. Julian hesitated. He had never liked cameras, but Rachel continued. They need to hear your voice. Not just the data, the father, the soldier, the man who kept receipts while everyone else looked away. So Julian agreed, not for ego, but for every quiet employee who had been passed over, dismissed, whispered about behind doors they were never invited into. He would speak for them. The night before the article went live, Naomi couldn't sleep. Daddy? He turned toward her in the hallway. What's up, baby? Are they going to say mean things about you? Julian kneeled down.
Maybe. She was quiet for a moment. Are you scared? He smiled gently. Not anymore. Why not? He thought for a moment. Then said, because I know who I am, and now, so will everyone else. The next morning, the story broke, front page. The quiet analyst who brought down a corporate giant. The article didn't dramatize. It didn't need to. It simply showed the truth. Side-by-side performance reviews, HR manipulation logs, direct quotes from Vanessa Blake's calls. And then, Julian's voice, his background, his story. His words, I didn't want revenge, I just wanted to matter. The response? Immediate. Hundreds of emails, letters, LinkedIn messages. Black and brown employees from across the country. You told my story. I've been through this for years. Thank you for being brave. HR professionals, law professors, activists. Executives, some angry, some ashamed. Some inspired, and one from Jasmine Lee, the assistant who'd vanished. Her message was simple. You finished what I started. I'm proud of you. Vanessa Blake issued a public apology 2 days later. Not on camera, just a written statement. Polished, sanitized, approved by lawyers. But no one believed her anymore, because the world had heard the unedited version, and they believed Julian. That Friday evening, Julian stood at his window, watching Naomi chase bubbles in the small yard below. He could have disappeared now. Lawsuit settled. Name cleared. But something inside him said, not yet. There were others still in the shadows. And maybe, just maybe, he had more work to do. Because Julian Carter was never just fighting for himself. He was building something bigger. A shield, a legacy, a future where his daughter would never have to prove her worth twice just to be treated fairly once. It had been 3 weeks since the story broke, 3 weeks since Vanessa Blake lost everything, 3 weeks since Julian Carter became more than just a name in a personnel file. He became a symbol, a quiet man who fought back, not with noise, but with receipts, with dignity, and with a daughter watching his every move. Since the investigation, the company had gone into full damage control. They issued a public apology, set up a task force, announced new diversity initiatives. But Julian knew what those things really were. Band-aids on bullet wounds. What mattered wasn't the statement. It was the structure. One morning, Julian got a call from Charles Whitmore, the company's CEO. It surprised him. They hadn't spoken since the day Vanessa was removed, but this time Charles sounded different. Not defensive. Not polished, but tired. Julian, he began, we're rethinking everything. And I'd like to ask, would you consider coming back, not as an analyst, as a consultant, to help rebuild this from the inside? Julian didn't answer right away, because this wasn't just a job offer, it was a test of purpose. He hung up the phone and sat in silence. Naomi peeked into the room. Who was that? Julian smiled faintly. Someone asking for help. Are you going to help them? He looked at her carefully. I don't know. Do you think I should? She thought for a long moment. Then shrugged. Only if they listen this time. That night, Julian met with Grace Howard and Rachel Klein. "I thought you wanted to walk away," Grace said.
"I did," Julian replied. Rachel added, "You have the chance to become a national voice, speeches."
"Book deals. You could lead something huge." Julian shook his head. "I don't need a spotlight."
"I need change." He thought back to his time in the army. They taught him something there. Don't just win battles. Change terrain. And maybe the best way to do that wasn't from the outside throwing stones, it was from the inside, rewriting the blueprint. 2 weeks later, Julian walked back into the building he had left in silence. But this time, the stares were different. Not suspicion. Respect. Sharon Blake from HR greeted him with a nervous smile. "We're glad you're here." Julian nodded, but said nothing, because trust wasn't built in a day, and he wasn't here to be thanked. He was here to make sure what happened to him never happened again. He began meeting with teams, reading policies, interviewing staff who'd never spoken up before, and what he uncovered. It was deeper than Vanessa Blake. It was in the training manuals, in the hiring rubrics, in the invisible assumptions baked into every system. But Julian didn't tear it down with outrage. He dismantled it piece by piece with questions, with analysis, with truth. Meanwhile, the DOJ case widened. Julian's data led to investigations in 3 other firms. Jasmine Lee, the former assistant, joined the effort, and slowly, employees across the country began stepping forward. They didn't want revenge. They wanted fairness. They wanted a voice. And somehow, without meaning to, Julian became a guide. He spoke on panels not for fame, but because people needed to hear that you could speak up and still stand tall, that you could be underestimated and still outlast them, that you could be a father, a fighter, and a builder of something better. At home, Naomi had started a new project for school. She called it My Dad's Voice. She drew charts like he did, wrote quotes she overheard him say. Her favorite? "Sometimes the strongest thing you can be is prepared." One night, Julian tucked her in, and she asked, "Daddy, are you famous now?" He laughed. "No, I'm just someone who didn't back down," she grinned. "That's cooler than famous." But Julian wasn't done yet. He pushed for hiring audits. He helped write a new review process that stripped away bias. He created an anonymous feedback system for promotions. He didn't want power. He wanted transparency. And slowly, things changed. The whispering stopped. The silence was broken. People started speaking up because they knew someone was finally listening. One afternoon, Charles Whitmore stopped by his office. "You know," he said, "you could have sued us for everything." Julian nodded. "I still could." Charles smiled nervously. "But you didn't." Julian looked him in the eye. "No, because I wasn't here to destroy. I was here to rebuild." He paused. "But make no mistake, if you ever go back to the old ways, I'll burn it all down with truth again." Charles swallowed hard, then nodded. Because he knew. Julian meant every word. That evening, Julian stood by the window again, watching Naomi play in the yard, wind in her hair, laughing like the world was safe, and for the first time in a long time, maybe it was. Because someone fought for it to be, not with fists, not with noise, but with patience, with proof, and with purpose. The air was warm that evening. Golden light spilled across the living room floor, painting soft stripes on the hardwood. Julian Carter stood by the window, watching his daughter Naomi chase bubbles in the front yard barefoot, laughing, free. And for the first time in what felt like years, he allowed himself to breathe. The storm had passed, but not without cost. Vanessa Blake's trial was still pending. The Department of Justice had expanded their investigation. Other companies had come under fire. New policies were in the works, but for Julian, it wasn't about victory anymore. It was about what came next. He had returned to work not just as a consultant, but as a guardian, a quiet force behind systemic change, the kind of change that didn't make headlines, but changed lives. The walls of the office now bore new posters, real commitments. Not slogans. There were open forums, bias audits, leadership evaluations with external oversight. Was it perfect? No. But it was real, and real was more than enough for now. That afternoon, Julian had packed up a box from his temporary office. Not because he was quitting, but because his time there had served its purpose. He had planted the seed. And now, it was time to pass the water to someone else. He carried the box to his car, keys in hand, when Sharon Blake from HR caught up to him.
"You sure you don't want to stay longer?" Julian smiled. "I was never supposed to stay forever." She hesitated. "I just want to say, thank you."
"For what you did, for all of us." Julian turned to her. "Then make sure it doesn't stop with me." At home, Naomi waited at the kitchen table. She had drawn something again. This time, it was a tree, but not just any tree. Its trunk was strong, deep brown. Its branches were filled with words: respect, truth, courage, listening, justice. And at the roots, one word: Daddy. Julian felt his throat tighten. He sat beside her. "What's this, sweet girl?" Naomi grinned. "It's the tree you grew." Julian chuckled softly. "I did?" She nodded. "Because you didn't let them cut you down." He held the paper in silence. That little girl had watched everything. She had seen the tension in his shoulders when he came home late. She had seen the fatigue in his eyes. She had seen the strength he didn't speak out loud. And somehow, she had understood all of it. He thought back to the beginning. That night at the office party, he had just been trying to do the right thing, help a drunk boss get home safely. That was all. No motives, no games, just kindness. But kindness, in the wrong eyes, had almost cost him everything. Because of bias, because of power, because of the lie that said people like him didn't belong in boardrooms. But instead of backing down, he had chosen to stand. Quietly, firmly, relentlessly, with evidence, with integrity, with love for a little girl who believed in him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't take revenge. He didn't destroy for the sake of destruction. He simply said, "Here is the truth." And when the truth finally stood up, the lies had nowhere left to hide. Later that night, Naomi climbed into bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "Daddy? Will people always be mean to others who look different?" Julian sat on the edge of her bed. "Sometimes they will. But more and more people are starting to speak up now, because they saw what happens when someone finally does." Naomi thought for a moment. "Like you?" Julian looked at her. "No," he said, "like us, because you were right there with me." She smiled, sleepy. "Will I have to fight someday?" Julian kissed her forehead. "I hope not. But if you do, you'll know how." He stood at the door and looked back at her small, but powerful. Then he turned off the light. In the weeks that followed, Julian was asked to speak at colleges, non-profits, corporate boards. He said yes to some, no to others, because not everyone wanted change, some just wanted a face. But he was not a mascot. He was a father, a builder, a man who believed that every step forward mattered, even if no one clapped. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Julian and Naomi planted a real tree in their backyard. She chose the spot. He dug the hole. Together they lowered the sapling. Naomi pressed the dirt down with both hands. "Do you think it'll grow tall?" she asked. Julian nodded. "If we take care of it,
and protect it from the people who don't believe in its roots, then yes.
It'll grow taller than both of us. They stood in silence. Then Naomi whispered, "Will people know it's our tree?" Julian smiled. "They don't need to." She looked up. "Why not?" "Because trees don't ask for credit, they just give shade." And in that moment, Julian Carter knew. His legacy wasn't in headlines, it was in her eyes, in her voice. In the future, she would walk into stronger because of the fight he never wanted but refused to lose. He wasn't just the man who exposed the lie. He was the man who proved what truth could do when it refuses to be silent. Life lesson from Julian Carter's story. In a world where power often protects privilege and silence rewards the guilty, Julian Carter reminds us of something deeper. Truth may take time, but it never loses its voice. He didn't shout. He didn't seek revenge. He stood firm, documented every injustice, and let character speak louder than accusation. His journey teaches us that dignity is not granted, it's claimed, especially when you're seen as invisible. For older Americans who've weathered life's storms, this story echoes a timeless truth. Patience, preparation, and integrity still matter. Whether it's in a boardroom, a courtroom, or across the kitchen table, standing up for what's right doesn't always require a fight. It requires evidence, courage, and knowing who you are when no one's clapping. Like Julian, we may not always choose the battles we face, but we can choose how we face them with wisdom, calm, and the quiet strength that says, "You may underestimate me, but you'll never undo me." Because justice isn't just about who wins, it's about who refuses to surrender their soul in the process. Hoy ChatGPT.